Hey, you there! Tried the new Endgame mode Imaginarium Theater yet? Well, I have. To be honest, I don't think it's a very hard game mode, but during my time playing it, I noticed some things in particular which I thought would be neat to share with you all, so your Imaginarium Theater experience could be that much smoother. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. Something I noticed is that when team building, you often end up with nonsensical combinations that can feature two on-field DPSs at one time, or end up using Farazan with no Anemo DPS in the party, because she's your only remaining party member choice left. So because of this, don't use gear on your characters which relies on other units to work. Use the weapon choice which suits a character best in a solo run setting, because the chance of you being able to play a competent team is unreliable and up in the air, so it's better to not rely on any external sources or buffs to make a certain thing work. For example, on Hu Tao, instead of me running my usual Staff of the Scarlet Sands, because I'm not guaranteed to be playing her with Xianyun, the overheal problem with Homa's passive isn't as prevalent. Not only that, but this is a season where the only Hydro available is Sigewinne, and she does barely any Hydro application, while also most likely having a very low ownership rate. So Hu Tao goes Vapeless. Therefore, building EM and focusing on it for Staff of the Scarlet Sands scalings is wasted, and building an HP % Sands with Homa is more effective instead. Think about all the other weapons which require some external source to reach max potential, like Uraku Misugiri enjoying Zhongli and Flex because the second half of the passive can activate. However, this ends up being totally nullified on Theater's restricted format, as no Geos are even in the special cast. And some artifact sets are also victim to this. Unfinished Reverie will have no true users until Emily, but it relies on burning. If Dendro is in a season without Pyro, this gets voided on her. And a huge contender for this is Mayonnaise Hunters. In Abyss, this set is incredible, but in Imaginarium, where you do a continuous run, HP loss mechanics are tied to Furina. She is the key that made this set usable on every DPS character in the first place. Yet now, it's either you won't have access to her in a season, or if you do, it's only for 2 rounds at a random time until you gain full access. Great. Now, no, please don't go out and farm a bunch of new signature sets for all of your DPSs. You mostly just fight trash mobs in Theater. The damage numbers required aren't that high. Just switch to a random 2-piece set instead, or throw on a rainbow set with better substats, since those will be stronger than just a set that doesn't work at all. TLDR is simply avoid overly specific sets in Imaginarium and go for mix and match or resin efficient sets instead. While I'm at it, I think it's also worth me mentioning how some characters are very restrictive in nature, and being thrown into a scenario where they can't play with their ideal teammates may completely throw off their core gimmick, essentially bricking them. Nilou has to be in a season with Dendro, otherwise she is plain unusable, unless you want to do a little trolling. If you know, then you know. Chevreuse is pretty happy this Theater since she has Electro to be paired with, but if you're forced to play Anemo within that same team, because trust me, there are situations where because you're forced into using 4 teammates every time, you may end up having to put an extra character in there that isn't Electro or Pyro, which throws off Chevreuse's overload buffs. Though note that her Constellation 6 and A4 will still work, and an Animal Unit 4VV Shred will make up for the loss of her A1. This is what I meant in my previous video when I said that Imaginarium Theater seriously tests your game knowledge. How many of you knew that Chevreuse still had benefits even when you have a non-Electro or Pyro in her teams? Small tips like that can help you create synergies within awkward team situations. Other really team-dependent characters like Sino and Ito, who are just really bad without their best-in-slot teams because of how specifically they tailor to them, aren't ideal. But it really is as simple as aren't ideal, not that they're unplayable, because trash mobs aren't that tough. On the flip side, this does make super adaptable characters like Navia or Raiden even more desirable, which is super cool, especially in Navia's case, because she's already really good in general. We love to see more uses for her. Not this season though, since Geo isn't invited. Imaginarium is always going to favor characters that can play in as many teams as possible, which is why I begrudgingly accept Ayato's existence now. He does 0 damage, but you only really fight trash mobs 80% of the time, so that's fine, and his flexibility lends himself well to goofy rainbow teams. This is what I mean by Imaginarium giving somewhat irrelevant characters a pedestal to step up on. I've already mentioned how you don't need a super high amount of damage to clear Theater. This makes the bar to clearing very low. I got plenty of comments on my last video saying that this game mode is more catered to older players because you need so many characters built for it, but I disagree. This is because your builds can honestly be extremely subpar and baseline free to play, while still clearing perfectly fine in time. At worst, you won't get all of the stars, which doesn't matter that much for the rewards anyway. I'll touch on that a little later. So what does this mean? If you don't have a DPS of every element super well kitted out, and you're annoyed that you've dumped everything into 2 really strong vertically invested teams, don't worry about it. This is the time for all those 4-star DPSs that you ignored in the past to shine. You don't even have to build them that well. Literally level 80 with level 8 talents and mid artifacts will be more than sufficient to clear. Yip, your Yanfei and Heizo will actually have purpose again. And it's nice because you can reuse those 4 stars for other purposes later down the line, such as C4 Tankfei or Sucro's replacement Heizo with the 80 EM he gives your entire team. Imaginarium Theater's damage ceiling is not high enough to justify pulling an entire 5-star DPS over. Speaking of which, standard 5 stars like Kaching may see some use on accounts which have already pulled for an upgrade like Yaimiko or preferably Clorinde. Any character that has an overlapping role as such will be pretty useful, because then you'll have more electro DPSs to cover more of theater, for example, because you can't just use the same one the whole way through. Essentially, this is my calling to those of you who may be struggling due to a lack of units built. Go and build all your old, forgotten 4 stars and standard 5 stars. You don't even have to invest that much into them. Simply get them to a usable state and you'll be fine. If the trial characters can clear comfortably, then your own builds being brought up to a similar quality should be able to as well. Now let me run over a few things that may have confused some of you guys. First off, the stars don't dictate how many rewards you get. I got 6 out of 8 of the stars on my first run through the entire thing and still maxed out all of the rewards. The stars give you those little flowers, which are equivalent to cosmic fragments in Honkai Star Rail Simulated Universe. For the uninitiated, that basically means the stars give you spendable currency, and you spend that currency on either getting buffs throughout your run, or adding more characters to your available cast. And feel free to spend as much as those flowers as you want, but be strategic about it of course, because they also have no effect on your clear. They are just there to act as your main currency throughout the run. So what does affect your clear, I hear you ask? Getting through the whole thing and beating all of the bosses in time. Sounds simple enough, don't you think? It's all a very straightforward process, so please don't sweat it too much or worry about its complexity because of the extra metrics that they throw in there. Simply clearing hard mode adequately is enough to acquire all of the rewards, which further emphasizes that low bar to entry point I made earlier. It's also worth noting how easy such a task is, even for characters with a more mediocre build. Also, the debut rewards are essentially your quote-unquote one-time first clear rewards. Think about floors 1 to 8 of the Spiral Abyss. Also, compared to having 2 Abyss resets every month, having 1 Imaginarium and 1 Abyss reset nets us slightly more Primo Gems on the whole, about 1 to 2 more pulls. It's not much, but for those curious, there you go. It's worth noting that Constellations do in fact take place within Imaginarium, so if you're considering whether you need to change your builds to suit around the C0 playstyle, don't. Your cons still apply. Also, the same applies to friend characters, so if you have any whale friends of a C2 to 6 character, yes, sharing with them will allow you to totally cheese at least 2 stages of theater because of how much a C6 completely outscales the difficulty of Imaginarium Theater's content. Simply make sure that if any of your whale builds are built for a team-based setting, which is natural, as Genshin is typically a very teams-focused game, make sure to adjust them so that they'll be fine solo as well, considering how you might end up having to deploy your C6 in a less than stellar team comp. But honestly, it's a C6. You'll be able to go in, as is, 99.99% of the time, without much more setup required. And dear new players, please do not feel overly stressed out if you can't clear this game mode. I understand it's probably kind of demeaning to see everybody trashing this as the easiest game mode in Genshin Impact and then not being able to clear it yourself. I remember how annoyed I felt joining the game back in 2.1 and seeing all the Kokomi sucks videos because I got her as my first 5-star. Were they telling the truth? Back then, yes, absolutely. Did their criticisms apply to a fresh new player like me? No, not really. Yes, Imaginarium is easy in the sense that after a mere 2 to 3 months of consistent dedicated play, you should be able to clear it just fine. Maybe make that longer if you want to factor in externals, such as work, school, etc. This annoys us players who have been playing for 3 to 4 years, building a ton of characters over a long time who were hoping for something harder. So seriously, don't feel ashamed for having to start down to easy or medium mode. You don't have that many characters yet, and please acknowledge that most Genshin Impact YouTube videos that aren't explicitly about whether the game is worth playing in the current year or not will usually be tailored towards players who kinda get what's up and have played for 6+ months at least. You'll be happy to know that basically 80% of characters are viable in Theater, take that number with a grain of salt, and whatever you end up pulling for will be viable since Theater is full of nonsense anyway. But as of now, take a backseat from all the online discourse, or at least take it with a large grain of salt in your situation. Because at your stage in the game, all you need to focus on is enjoying the story and exploration experience, and seeing if the core gameplay is even right for you in the first place. And focus on collecting more and more characters that you like over time, so that you can actually build a varied roster and then consider Imaginarium Theater. I think Imaginarium Theater is a super simple game mode on the whole, and not much guidance is required when it comes to it. Even if you don't really get the full gist, that's fine. Simply spamming random strong characters in the best team that you can think of with the handicaps at hand will still be enough to clear. On my first run through, I paid attention to literally nothing, for example, and still managed to clear. So turn your brains off and have some goofy wacky team-based fun for 10 to 15 minutes. Hopefully this video was able to deliver you some quality tips to help make your experience playing Imaginarium Theater just that bit much smoother. This has been Juice, signing out. And if you'll excuse me, it's my turn on the Lini Yaimiko Sino Faruzan team.